So today I wanted to talk, continuing on along the lines of borrowed frequency. But today, let's talk about the mechanics of where that really comes from. And we touched on this a little bit last week, but we'll dive a little bit deeper and then give some examples of kind of what it feels like, what it sounds like, what you may experience if you are running through borrowed frequency. Okay. So last week we talked about your borrowed frequency comes from all of your openness in your chart. Now, that's not to say that all openness is created equally or that some openness won't talk, sound, be louder than others. So, for simplicity's sake, today we're going to talk about your borrowed frequency specifically through your open centers. Now, anybody with a split definition, that's not necessarily where everything comes from initially or what will be loudest. But again, simplicity's sake, we're just going to go with open centers. So, from a genetic standpoint, when we think about the biology behind human design is not all woo, it's not all spiritual. There is science behind it, whether it's astrophysics, physics, biology, genetics, all the things. Okay. So, when you look at your human design body chart, you will see colored things that are colored in, whether they're brown, red, black, green, yellow, or white. White is your openness. So when we look at your borrowed frequency, all of your borrowed frequency initiates from your openness. Now, it's your mind that does all the stuff with it that causes all of the pain from it. So what's happening is that your mind looks at all of your openness and says, oh, that is what I'm not. So from a genetic standpoint, your genes are looking for things that are very different from you. So if you have an open center, your genetics are looking for a human being that has a defined center. That is what you are going to be attracted to because in your mind and through your genetics, that is what you're not. And oh, by the way, if you go procreate with something that you're not, you deepen, you broaden, you make the gene pool bigger. That's what's happening. But because your mind doesn't understand how to use or utilize the energy that moves through your open centers, it tries to fixate on a specific frequency related to that open center. That's why I call it your borrowed frequency. So think about this. For any gate in your human design chart, so when you think about a gate, that's any little number that's on your human design chart from 1 to 64. So there are nearly 1,100 different variations of frequency related to each gate in the human design chart. So if you have a completely open center, let's say you have a completely open emotional center, there are 7 gates in the emotional center, if I'm remembering from, I don't have one in front of me, so I think there are 7 gates. So 1,100 times 7 is 7,700 different kinds of frequencies or different variations of frequencies that exist within your emotional center. So if you have a completely open emotional center, or even if you have one gate activation, you nearly have 7,700 different frequencies that your mind is trying to fixate on. It doesn't know how to utilize energy that flows in and out of that emotional center because it is not defined for you. Now think about it the other side. Where you are defined in your chart, let's say you have a defined spleen. I have a defined splenic system. Every single gate in my splenic system, which should be 7, are defined. So I have a very, very fixed frequency in my splenic center, and it is related to how all of my gates are defined in that center. Flip to the emotional side. I only have one gate activated, one line, one tone, one base, one color. So there's one way that I can kind of experience emotions in my emotional center. the rest of which is completely open. That means there are 7,699 different variations that I can feel through my open emotional center. That is why emotions are so chaotic for me. That's when I feel emotions. It's like, I don't, what is going on? I don't know I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to process this. And oh, by the way, because I am open in that center, my mind, when I experience emotions or when I'm taking in someone else's emotions, it's trying to fixate on a very specific frequency that is not natural to me. That is borrowed frequency. And what your borrowed frequency tries to do is that all of the areas where you're open in your chart, again, we're focusing on centers right now. All of those open, your mind is trying to pinpoint a specific frequency in that center, trying to say, oh, that is me. Oh, I need to experience this energy this way, or this is the only way I can experience this energy. Combines all of that. That is your borrowed frequency. And what a borrowed frequency also tries to do is it tries to override your natural authority. It tries to create a false sense of authority and overrides your natural authority. In the world of human design, your authority is the way that you are here to make decisions. So looking at me specifically, I am a sacral generator, but my sacral is connected to my splenic system, my very, very active splenic system. So in a way, I'm actually really kind of a spontaneous sacral generator. So that my spleen informs my sacral, and that's what says, yes, I have the available energy for this, or no, I do not. My spleen will act faster than my sacral and informs it to say what to say yes or no to. However, when I am working through my borrowed frequency, what I've experienced in my life, I have an open G center, I have an open, completely gateless open ego center, an open emotional center, and an open head. And I also have a split definition, but we'll keep the split definition outside for right now. So from my borrowed frequency, oftentimes what tends to run the show, what tends to override my natural spontaneous yes or no in the moment is my emotions or my ego center. And now sometimes your borrowed frequency isn't always necessarily created equally either. Depending on the situation, it could be my ego that's speaking louder of, no, Lauren, you need to go out and prove that you can do this. It might be my open G center that says, oh God, Lauren, if you don't do this, you won't find love, you won't find your identity, you won't find direction. But a lot of times, it's my open emotional center. Now, what happens in all of your open centers too is that you take in the energy from other people through your open centers. You, through an open center, you're absorbing the energy that comes from other people in those instances. So for anybody who's emotionally undefined like me, we take in and we amplify the emotions of other people. We amplify them 200%. So think about that. If you're around somebody who's emotionally defined and they're at the low end of their wave, you're going to intake the low end of whatever they're feeling. Maybe that's depression, maybe that's sadness, maybe that's anger, maybe that's frustration, maybe that's bitterness, maybe that's disappointment. You're taking that in, whoo, and multiplying that by 200%. So all of a sudden you're like, whoa. Where is this really coming from? You start getting angry. You start yelling. You start whatever. Can also happen at the high end of their wave. You walk into somebody's aura who's emotionally defined and they're feeling a ton of joy, a ton of excitement, a ton of happiness, a ton of whatever. You're going to amplify that. And because the emotional center overrides every other authority in human design. So again, anybody who's emotionally defined, that it's automatically their authority. That is how they make decisions through their emotional wave. There is no truth in the now for them. That means that they are not really here to make spontaneous decisions. But I am. So think about that. When I'm in the aura of somebody who is emotionally defined through no fault of my own, just by happenstance, just by the mechanics of energy, I'm taking in their emotions and I'm amplifying them. So if they're really excited, I may make a spontaneous decision based on that excitement. Now, because I'm here to make spontaneous decisions, that part of the mechanic isn't necessarily wrong, but I may be overridden by my sacral may be overridden by their emotions. And I may make a decision that really isn't correct for me because I'm allowing my borrowed frequency, their emotions, to make that decision for me. Or I'm allowing their emotions through my energy to make that decision. Now, the other thing too is anybody like those of us who have an open emotional system, we're taking in the emotions of others. So I have experienced in my life that I can make really emotional decisions. And I have been called very emotional by other people. Yeah, I can be very emotional because I take in the emotions of others and I amplify them 200%. I'm also not here to have a natural way of processing emotion. So when I'm taking in others and I don't necessarily feel them the way they feel them, yeah, I'm going to blow them up. So what I've experienced in my life when my borrowed frequency has actually become my borrowed authority, I can make very spontaneous emotional decisions. A couple of things have happened to me just recently where I've been, we'll say, triggered in a situation or I've been made angry. I found myself angry based on the actions of others. In an instant, I can feel this like rush of emotion that came. And I was like, absolutely not. This person is not going to do this to me. I'm not going to take this from them. All of a sudden, I'm spouting off a text. I'm trying to get their attention, telling them, what I think in the situation and making a very explosive, very in the moment emotional decision. I do that. And the moment that it's over, I'm like, oh, I see what I did there. Yeah, that was a really emotional decision. What I've often said too in my life is that before I understood the mechanics of this, I would always say, yeah, whenever I get the emotion off my chest, I feel a lot better. I feel a lot clearer. I feel a lot calmer. But I've created a situation in my wake that now becomes a bigger deal to deal with simply because I didn't recognize that I was taking in someone's borrowed frequency, utilizing that as my borrowed authority. And now I have to deal with a situation that if I were to be operating through my own true frequency, probably wouldn't be a situation at all. Had I just given myself time to root through the emotions that I was feeling or just kind of let them pass through. Again, I don't have emotional authority. I have a nearly completely open emotional center. Emotions are really chaotic. I don't know what to do with them, but I can allow them to override, hijack my true frequency, and hijack my true authority, creating borrowed frequency and borrowed authority. So, this is why it's so incredibly important to understand not only your true frequency will come alive the moment that you're living through your own strategy and authority. Your strategy is dictated by your type. So I'm a generator. I'm here to respond. I'm not here to initiate. I'm not here to start. I'm simply here to wait for life to bring me things to respond to. If you're a reflector, you're here to wait through your lunar cycle. If you're a projector, you're here to wait for the invitation. If you're a manifestor, you're here to inform. That's your strategy. Your authority is how you make decisions. For the majority of people, that falls into three categories. You're either emotional, sacral, or splenic. Now, there are 4 other types of authorities, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just focus on those 3. That's why it's extremely important to understand your strategy and authority so that your true frequency comes alive when you need it to. But what's more important is to understand where your borrowed frequency comes from, because that borrowed frequency inevitably will override and hijack not only your true frequency, but likely your true authority as well. And that's what we do in this channel, is that we are going to dive all kinds of deep into that borrowed frequency so that you understand where it's coming from, how it affects your life, and what you can do to start unraveling the hijacking or overriding of your borrowed frequency and how to minimize it overriding and hijacking your borrowed authority. Because one of the worst things that you can do, worse, yeah, we'll be that extreme. One of the worst things you can do is make a decision from your place of who you're not or through your borrowed frequency or borrowed authority, because then that decision is not correct for you. That's what leads to all this resistance that you experience in life, whether you're a leader. You make a decision about a team member or a project through your borrowed frequency. What happens? That problem becomes an even bigger problem because that decision wasn't necessarily correct for you. Then you make a decision with your partner in your personal life through borrowed frequency. Now, therein lies a little bit of a complexity is that when we get into partnership, we can also see how someone else's energy affects us, and we've got to be conscious of that. But first and foremost, that's why we need to understand our borrowed frequency and what could lead to our borrowed authority. So these are some things that are going to come up in some of the newsletters. If you have questions, if you have comments, please feel free to either chat me these messages, email me, whatever the case may be. I'm always interested in making these that are specific to you, that are relevant to you. But we're going to start diving deeper into the mechanics of borrowed frequency, where it comes from, how it affects you, and most importantly, how we can all override that. Have a great day.